Kang Jae-hyun knew every sound Obsidian made. He knew the particular pitch of the roulette wheel on table 7, slightly off, replaced twice, still not right. He knew which dealer on the main floor shuffled too slowly on Friday nights, and which bartender overpoured for attractive customers. He knew that the ventilation system in the east corridor hummed a half step lower than the west, and that the chandelier above the private dining room had a single bulb that flickered once, imperceptibly, every 40 minutes. He knew these things because he had built this place to be known. Every corner, every angle, every blind spot that wasn't actually blind, because he had put a camera there anyway. Obsidian did not surprise him. Nothing did, anymore. He stood at his office window, 2 floors above the main floor, and watched the casino breathe below him. The Friday crowd moved in predictable currents. Money toward the tables, alcohol toward the bar, ambition toward the private rooms. Min Sok stood 4 feet behind him, silent in the way only large men who have learned patience can be. Tariq was stationed at the main entrance, his low-cut silhouette barely visible at the edge of the monitor feed to Jae-hyun's left. Jae-hyun lifted his wine glass, drank, set it down. The gold chain at his throat caught the light from the city beyond the glass. His undercut was freshly tapered, every line precise. The neck tattoo, a small, dark thing that crept just above his collar when he moved a certain way, was the only detail about him that most people never got close enough to see. The scar near his brow, fine as a thread, was older, a reminder from a time before he had learned to make himself untouchable. He did not think about that time. Chairman. Min Sok's voice was flat, stripped of inflection the way a blade is stripped of everything that isn't edge. There's been an incident. Main floor, near the east pillar. Jae-hyun did not turn immediately. He watched one more rotation of the roulette wheel on the monitor, let the number land. Then he set his wine down and walked to the balcony railing that overlooked the casino floor. The crowd moved. Music played. The chandeliers threw gold across 600 square feet of curated excess. And there, near the east pillar, a woman was pulling herself upright using the marble as leverage. Her white blouse was dark at the side. Her hair had come loose. One hand was pressed to her ribs, and even from here, even at this distance, something about the way she held herself, not collapsing, not asking for help, just enduring, made the breath stall in his chest. He recognized her before he understood how. The composure he had spent a decade building held for exactly 3 seconds. Then, it cracked. They offered her the wheelchair twice. The second time, she looked at the man holding it with an expression so flat and so final that he simply folded it back against the wall and stepped aside. She walked to the elevator herself, one hand pressed to her ribs, her jaw set at an angle that dared anyone in the corridor to comment. Min Sok followed 2 steps behind. He did not offer his arm. He was, at least, intelligent enough for that. The penthouse was everything the casino floor wasn't. Quiet, still, the city reduced to a glittering abstraction 30 floors below. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. Furniture the colour of pale stone. A kitchen that looked as though no one had ever been hungry in it. A doctor was already waiting, his bag open on the low table, his expression professionally neutral. "No," Scarlett said, before he could speak. He looked at the syringe in his hand. "It's only a local—" "I said no." She lowered herself onto the edge of the sofa, slowly, and fixed him with a look that had nothing to do with pain. "Who sent you? Who pays you? Who gets the report?" A beat of silence. Chairman Kang, the doctor said carefully. Then I'll wait. She waited. Jae-hyun arrived 11 minutes later. She knew it was 11 minutes because she counted, a habit she had developed in the years since she had learned that waiting without measuring it made you weak. He came through the main door without knocking, which told her everything about how he understood this space and her place in it. He was still in the black shirt from the restaurant, the gold chain catching the penthouse light. He looked at the untouched medical bag. He looked at her. He pulled a chair from the dining table, set it across from her, and sat down. Talk, he said. So she did. She told him about the 3 months of silence, the emptied bank account, the single photograph her brother had sent before his phone went dark. She told him about the financial trail, shell companies, transfer records, a name that kept appearing at the edges of every document like a watermark. She told him the name had led her to Seoul, that Seoul had led her to Obsidian, that the syndicate's men had found her in the parking structure before she'd made it through the door. She told him all of it in the same tone she had used with the doctor, even, deliberate, giving nothing away that she hadn't decided to give. He listened without moving, without blinking, it seemed. When she finished, the city hummed indifferently beyond the glass. You should have called me, he said. You should have left a number. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, replaced the chair precisely where he'd found it, and left. The doctor treated her in silence. When he was gone, when the door closed and the penthouse settled into its expensive quiet, Scarlett sat alone and looked at the city and let her hands, at last, only now, only in private, begin to shake. By morning, someone had filled the refrigerator. Scarlett stood in front of it, door open, the cold air meeting the bruise along her ribs, and stared at the contents the way she might stare at evidence. Fruit, arranged by colour. Water, still and sparkling, both. A container of something warm that shouldn't still have been warm, but was. She closed the door without taking anything. There were clothes folded on the second bedroom chair, her size, tags removed. She didn't touch those either. The penthouse was extraordinary in the specific way that cages sometimes are. All light and elevation and the illusion of openness, while the walls held exactly as firm as any others. She had counted 4 exits the night before. The main door, the service entrance behind the kitchen panel, the fire stairs, accessible through a locked door she could open in under a minute with the right pressure point. The windows, which were not exits, but which her mind had catalogued anyway, because her mind did not know how to stop. She tried the main door at 7 a.m. Tarek was stationed at the elevator, arms loose at his sides, his posture the specific stillness of someone who had learned to look relaxed without ever actually being it. He didn't move when she approached, didn't reach for her, just met her eyes with the calm, focused attention of a man who noticed everything and reacted to nothing prematurely. She held his gaze and pressed the elevator button. The button did not light up. She tried again at 9, dressed now, her ribs taped beneath a grey shirt that wasn't hers. Tarek was still there. She wondered if he had moved at all, or if he simply existed in that particular square of hallway the way furniture existed, purposefully, permanently. This time he spoke. Chairman Kang asks that you give him until morning. A pause. It's already morning, I know. He means the next one. Scarlett looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned around and went back inside, She didn't sleep. She sat at the window instead, her knees drawn up, and watched Seoul arrange itself in daylight. The geometry of it, the density, the way the city moved like something that had never needed to be told how. She catalogued exits she would never use and memorized a floor plan she had already memorized, and told herself this was practical, not fear. 30 floors below and half a building away, Jae-hyun sat alone in his office. The monitors in front of him showed footage from the parking structure. He had watched it 4 times already. He watched it again. The moment the syndicate's men found her, the 11 seconds before she fought back, the specific way one of them had grabbed her wrist. He watched it with the focused, expressionless attention of someone processing information. His face did not change. That was the terrifying part. Not anger, not movement, just stillness, the kind that precedes something final and absolute and already decided. He watched it a 5th time. She had not told him everything. This was the thing she turned over in the dark, sitting at the window while the city moved below her and the penthouse held its expensive silence around her like a held breath. She had given him the outline: Daniel, the syndicate, the trail that led to Obsidian. She had handed him just enough to justify her presence, and withheld the part that changed everything. The photograph was sewn into the lining of her jacket, not hidden carelessly, sewn, with the small travel needle she kept in every bag she owned, because Scarlett Johnson had learned early that the things worth keeping were worth making difficult to take. Daniel had sent it 3 days before his phone went dark. No message, no explanation, just the image, a scanned document, dense with financial language she had spent 2 weeks learning to read, and a single name circled in red pen at the bottom of the page: Kang Dae-won. She had known the name before she knew what it meant, had felt it land somewhere cold and quiet in her chest the moment she ran it, and understood whose father it belonged to. She had sat with that knowledge for 3 weeks, turning it like a stone, trying to find an angle at which it meant something other than what it meant. She found none. At 2 in the morning, she unpicked the stitching with her thumbnail, retrieved the photograph, and walked into the living room. Jae-hyun was already there. He was standing at the glass with his back to her, still dressed, the city blazing beyond him. She wondered if he slept at all, or if men like him had simply replaced it with something more efficient. He turned when he heard her, and said nothing, waiting. She crossed to the low table between them and set the photograph down flat, smoothed it once with her palm, stepped back and watched his face. He looked at it for a long time, long enough that she began counting seconds again, the habit, the small anchor, and reached 14 before he moved. He didn't flinch. His jaw didn't tighten. The scar near his brow didn't pull. He simply looked at his father's name circled in red, at the document, at the date in the upper corner, and his expression remained exactly what it had been when he turned to face her, which was nothing, which was everything. "I know," he said. 2 words, spoken quietly, landing like a door closing in an empty building. Scarlett felt the cold move through her. Not fear, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The particular chill of realizing the ground beneath you is not what you believed it to be. She wrapped her arms around herself, the bruise along her ribs pressing back in reminder. "Then what are you going to do about it?" He looked up from the photograph. His dark eyes met hers across the low table, across the city's indifferent light, across 7 years of silence that suddenly felt very small. He didn't answer. That was the most frightening thing he had ever done to her. Minsek came to him at noon. Not through a message, not through an intermediary. He came himself, which meant he had decided the conversation required no record of its existence. Jae-hyun recognized the protocol. He had designed it. He set down the contract he'd been reading and waited while Minsek closed the office door and positioned himself in front of the desk with the bearing of a man delivering a report he had already rehearsed twice. "Speak," Jae-hyun said. Minsek spoke. His argument was clean in the way that brutal things sometimes were, stripped of sentiment, built entirely from logic, each point load-bearing and precisely placed. The woman knew too much. Her brother, wherever the syndicate was holding him, knew considerably more. The document she carried connected Kang Dae-won to a network of transactions that 12 separate agreements had been constructed to keep invisible. If that connection surfaced, through an investigation, through a journalist, through a grieving sister who had already demonstrated she was not easily discouraged, the consequences would not be limited to reputation. Minsek did not use the word eliminate. He was too careful for that. He used words like contain and resolve and manage the exposure, and the architecture of his language was so clean that a stranger might have missed what he was actually proposing.
Jae-hyun was not a stranger. He listened without interrupting, without shifting in his chair. He let Min-sok finish every sentence, follow every point to its conclusion, and complete the full shape of what he was suggesting. He owed him that. 11 years of service deserved the courtesy of being heard to the end. When Min-sok finished, the office was very quiet. Outside, Seoul moved in its indifferent millions. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. The ventilation hummed its half-step low note in the east corridor. Jae-hyun looked at Min-sok for a long moment. Not with anger. Anger was too available, too easily spent. What he looked at him with was something older and more final than anger. "If you suggest that again," Jae-hyun said, "you will not work for me." Min-sok held his gaze for exactly as long as it took to understand that the sentence was not a warning. It was a perimeter, already drawn, already permanent. Then he nodded once, the short, economical nod of a man recalibrating, and left. The door closed quietly behind him. Jae-hyun remained at his desk without moving. He thought about his father, who had built an empire on the premise that everything could be managed if you were willing to pay the right price. He thought about the men his father had trusted and what those men had understood their loyalty to mean. He thought about the difference between being loyal to a person and being loyal to what that person had built, and how his father had never seemed to notice that those were not the same thing. He was beginning to wonder how many people in this building hadn't noticed either. He picked up the contract again. He did not read it. She left at 3 in the afternoon, when the shift change at the elevator meant 4 minutes without Tariq. She had been patient about it. She had watched the rotation for 2 days, mapped the gap, said nothing. She took the service stairs she had identified on her first night, walked out through the hotel lobby on the building's ground floor, and was 3 blocks away before she allowed herself to breathe normally. The journalist's name was Park Soo-yen. She had been tracking the syndicate for 18 months through a network of sources Scarlett had spent a week cultivating from Daniel's contacts. They had agreed on a cafe in Mapo, public, busy, close to a subway entrance. Scarlett arrived 8 minutes early and sat with her back to the wall and watched the door. Park Soo-yen never walked through it. The 2 men who came instead were unhurried about it, which was the worst kind. Unhurried meant confident. Confident meant they had already accounted for the exits. Scarlett was on her feet before they reached her table, moving toward the kitchen, because the kitchen was the one variable they might not have covered. And then the back door opened, and a third man was there, and the calculation collapsed. What followed was fast and ugly and very close. She broke 2 fingers on the first man with the edge of the table. The second caught her across the shoulder and drove her into the wall, and the impact sang through her taped ribs like a current. The third had a knife, and the particular patience of someone who didn't need to rush. Tariq came through the back door before he could use it. He moved the way she had suspected he could move, without announcement, without wasted motion, each action the shortest distance between problem and solution. The first man went down. The second followed. The third managed to drag the knife across Tariq's forearm before Tariq put him on the floor with a finality that ended the conversation entirely.
Then it was quiet. Tariq looked at his arm. The cut was deep and bleeding freely through his sleeve. He looked at Scarlett. "Can you walk?" he said. "Can you drive?" she said. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat with her jacket pressed hard against his forearm, both hands holding pressure, watching the blood soak through the fabric at a rate that made her jaw tighten. He kept his eyes on the road and didn't make a sound. Not when she pressed harder. Not when she told him to. She thought about the refrigerator being filled without being asked, the clothes in her size with the tags removed, the elevator button that didn't light up, the rotation she had studied for 2 days and the gap she had believed was accidental. She thought about Tariq's eyes on the road and the arm he had put between her and a knife without hesitating. When they reached Obsidian, she didn't go upstairs. She sat down on the floor outside Jae-hyun's office, her back against the wall, and waited. She had walked out. She was back. She had chosen both, but only one of them had been hers. He found her outside his office and said nothing. He stepped over her legs. She was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, which was not the kind of thing people did outside his office, and opened the door and went inside. 30 seconds later, he came back out, looked down at her, and said, "Come." Not a question, but quieter than usual. She followed him to the kitchen. It was the one room in the penthouse that felt like someone had forgotten to make it beautiful. Fluorescent light, slightly too bright, the kind of functional quiet that existed in spaces designed for use rather than impression. He filled a kettle without asking, set it on the burner, and took 2 cups from a cabinet above the sink. He did not look at her. She sat at the small table near the window and waited. The tea he made was bad. Not carelessly bad, effortfully bad, which somehow made it worse. She drank it anyway, both hands around the cup, and watched him sit down across from her and look at the table for a long moment as though deciding something. Then he told her. His father found out in October of their 2nd year. Not through surveillance, through someone Jae-hyun had trusted, which was its own lesson, learned once and never forgotten. Kang Dae-won had called him home and laid it out with the particular calmness of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. The friendship would end. All contact, immediate, complete, permanent. Or Jae-hyun's father would begin a systematic process of making life difficult for Scarlett's family in ways that would be untraceable and irreversible. Her mother's employment, their housing, Daniel's school placement. He had the reach for all of it, and Jae-hyun had known it was not a performance. He had been 19. He said this without inflection, without the softening that might have made it easier to hear. He had been 19, and he had made a calculation that silence was cleaner than the alternative, that disappearing without explanation was a form of protection if the explanation itself caused harm. He had told himself this for 7 years, and some part of him had believed it, and some part of him had known exactly what it was. The fluorescent light hummed above them. Scarlett sat with it. She turned it over, the way she turned everything over, carefully, completely, looking at each face of it before she decided what it was. She did not cry. Her expression did not collapse. She simply sat with the truth of it, this 19-year-old boy and his terrible, loving, insufficient calculation, and let it be what it was. "You should have told me," she said finally. Her voice was even. "I would have run with you." He looked at her across the bad tea and the fluorescent light and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that. She was right. He had known she would be. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. She didn't squeeze it, didn't move, just covered it, her hand over his, warm and still, and left it there. Outside, Seoul carried on without them. Inside, in the too bright kitchen at 2 a.m, something that had been broken for 7 years did not mend itself. It simply, quietly, stopped bleeding. He made the call at 6 a.m, before the city had fully decided to be awake. The investigator's name was Young Hai Won. She had been building her case for 4 years from a small office in Yongsan that smelled of cold coffee and sustained fury. Jae-hun had known about her for 3 of those years. He had watched her work from a careful distance, cataloguing what she had, measuring how close she was getting, and doing nothing. This had not required active interference. Silence had been sufficient. He called her direct line. She answered on the second ring, which told him she had been waiting for something, though not for him. He told her his name. He heard her go very still on the other end. Then he told her what he had, and where to find it, and gave her the access credentials for a server his father had built, and he had maintained, and never used, and never deleted, because some part of him had always known this call was coming, eventually, in one form or another. He hung up before he could ask him why. He sat for a moment in the quiet office. Then he called Tariq. The instructions he gave were specific and brief. Tariq received them without questions, which was why Jae-hun had always trusted him with the things that mattered. He heard him move before the call ended, already in motion, already calculating the route, already 3 steps into the problem. Min-sok came to the office an hour later. He didn't knock this time. He stood in the doorway and looked at Jae-hun with an expression that had moved past arguments into something colder and more permanent. He had clearly already heard. In an organization like this, information about its own dismantling travelled fast. "Your father built this," Min-sok said. "I know," Jae-hyun said. "You understand what you've done?" "Yes." Min-sok looked at him for a long time. Then he left. He did not slam the door. He closed it with a quiet, deliberate finality that said everything his words hadn't. That some things, once done, rearranged every loyalty around them, and that he would not be coming back. Jae-hyun let him go. By midday, the syndicate's leadership had begun to fracture along the fault lines that Jung Hae-won's team opened with surgical speed. Tariq moved through the chaos the way he always moved, without announcement, without waste.
He located Daniel in a warehouse complex in Incheon that the syndicate had been using as overflow storage, which said everything about how they had valued him. He retrieved him with 2 other men and no complications worth reporting. He sent Jahyun the address of the hospital where Daniel had been taken. Jahyun printed it. He walked to the penthouse. Scarlett was at the window. She was always at the window, and turned when she heard him enter. He crossed the room and held out the paper. She looked at it, then looked at him. She didn't speak, and neither did he, because the address said everything his father's silence never had. She took it from his hand. He walked to the door and opened it. He did not ask her to come back. He did not make her any promises about what would remain when she returned, or whether the empire he had just set fire to would still be standing, or what he would be when the smoke cleared. He simply stood at the open door and waited to see what she chose. Daniel was smaller than she remembered. This was the thing that undid her, quietly in the back of a private hospital room, while Jae-hyun's medical team worked around her with the efficient courtesy of people paid to be invisible. Not the bruising along his jaw, or the way his hands shook when he reached for water, or the hollowness that 3 months of fear had carved beneath his cheekbones. It was the smallness. Her brother, who had always taken up more space than he needed, who had filled every room he entered with noise and motion, and the particular energy of someone who believed the world was essentially manageable. He looked diminished, carefully, systematically diminished. She sat beside his bed and held his hand, and did not cry, because he needed her to be the one who wasn't crying. He slept for most of the first day. She stayed. The medical team reported to someone she couldn't see via calls made in low Korean outside the door. She didn't ask who. She already knew who was paying attention from a distance, and she found, to her own quiet surprise, that she did not resent it. On the second day, Daniel was awake enough.
Tarek was at his post. He looked at her. He gave the faintest nod. Not a greeting exactly, more an acknowledgement, the kind that passed between people who had ridden somewhere difficult together and arrived, and stepped aside. The elevator button lit up. The penthouse was exactly as she had left it. Same pale stone furniture, same city blazing through 3 walls of glass. She went to the kitchen, sat down at the small table, and waited. He came in 20 minutes later. He stopped in the doorway. She looked at him. He looked at her. The city hummed its indifferent millions below them, and the fluorescent light did its best. And neither of them spoke, for long enough that it stopped feeling like silence and started feeling like something else. "Do you have tea," she said, "that doesn't taste like regret?" Something moved across his face, brief, unguarded, almost unfamiliar on him. Not quite a smile, the architecture of one. He moved to the kettle without a word. He sat down across from her. The cups were bad again. She drank hers anyway, both hands around it, and looked at him across the small table, and thought about the open door and the address and the choice she had made. The moment they found each other again, on a casino floor, in blood and marble, and 4 quiet words, was not the beginning of a rescue. It was the beginning of an accounting. And what they chose to do with that truth is the story. If this reached you, if you saw yourself in Scarlett's refusal to break, or in Jaehyun's impossible silence, we would love to know. Drop a comment below. Which character did you connect with more, and why? And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us, because the next story is already waiting.